Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We ask, in what ways can we show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can we mine the wisdom from the experiences of our lives and expand into those challenges? If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs, so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. And if you feel like giving a little back to this free content, please become a patron of the show and receive extra member benefits for less than a coffee a month. Or you can leave a review on iTunes and Facebook, all of which helps the podcast keep going and reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul. Head on over to patreon.com/NTM podcast to find out more. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast, we have a really special and beautiful guest, Katie Parker. Would you like to say hello, Katie?
Hello.
So we're talking about preparing for a positive postpartum during COVID / at any point in time, but particularly during a pandemic crisis, and what that might look like and what you need to consider. So it's going to be a really practical and beautiful dive into what this fourth trimester looks like inside and outside of a pandemic. And so we have a postpartum specialist to have that conversation with. So before we jump on, what I would love to do is just read you Katie's bio so that you have a concept of who she is and where she's come from. And please know that you will have all of the links to connect with Katie, a couple of her blogs that we're going to be referring to, and all other places and spaces to find her in the show notes. So please go there if you need more information. So Katie Parker is a social worker, postpartum doula, matrescence nerd, parent educator, women's circle facilitator, and mum of 2. She supports women during pregnancy, postpartum and beyond to honour themselves in motherhood, challenging the dominant paradigm that a mother's role is to sacrifice herself for her children. Katie's vision is that all mums-to-be transition to motherhood feeling confident and relaxed, with all the support they need to have a peaceful and nourishing postpartum period. She strongly believes it is time for a paradigm shift in the way new mothers are cared for. She believes education about the importance of rest and support in the postpartum period is the first step in creating this social change. Her work with couples starts during pregnancy, helping them to plan for the support they will need post-birth. She also believes a change is needed in the way mothers value and prioritise themselves, supporting mothers to see how important their mothering work is and how worthy they are of deep self-nourishment and care. Katie supports parents to navigate the toddler and preschooler years using a aware parenting approach that focuses on connection, holding space for big feelings, and setting boundaries with love. She's passionate about reparenting and loves working with mothers who are willing to do the work and heal their childhood stories. So you can already tell why we love her. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so delighted to have you here. Really and truly we are. And Bridget wrote a post on our page, it's probably a couple of weeks ago when we were organising this interview with you, and she proposed 2 questions to our followers and listeners. And they were, what kind of postpartum support do you hope for? And have you considered how COVID will impact this? And I thought they were two of the most beautiful questions because they invite us to have conversations internally that perhaps we haven't even considered. So Bridget and I have discussed before on this podcast that we had two very different experiences of postpartum, certainly first time round. And mine was I was so focused on birth, I didn't even think about postpartum. Didn't even think about it. Whereas Bridget was incredibly well resourced on what breastfeeding would look like and all the things of a new baby. And I hadn't even done any of that. So after I'd had this epic birth, it was like this massive cavity of like, what the heck do I do now? You know, and so much I can see back then, zero support, a baby I understood nothing about, and you know, no friends, no family support, like nothing, and trying to work this shit out on my own was horrific. And I definitely believe, like looking backwards, that I would have and did descend into what would likely have been a postpartum depression or anxiety. And I can see how I rode waves of that, certainly during his first probably 9 months, I reckon. So I'm really interested to hear from you, Katie, what you see as the fundamental flaws in our system and the way that we treat mothers, and also perhaps what breaks your heart around what you see more practically mothers or families setting themselves up for or not. So what does that feel like for you on, actually, you know, before we even do that, why postpartum? Why is that so important to you? Why does it break your heart and create your drive?
Well, like a lot of people who go into postpartum work, it's stemmed probably from my own voice. If similar to your experience, Julie, or I just didn't have that support. I didn't even know to plan for it. I just didn't know that postpartum support was a thing. So after, you know, I didn't even learn after my first baby. So even after my second postpartum experience, and also riding those waves of probably postpartum depression, or it got pretty scary there for a while. I realised that this is not the way things should be. New mothers need support, and I think to answer your first question there, I think it all starts with the lack of like the problem that we've got now is that, like, the reason we've got this problem, I think, with the lack of postpartum support for new mums is that there's no talk of it during pregnancy. Like in all the antenatal education that we receive through the hospital system, if we're birthing in a hospital, there really is no mention of needing to plan for a postpartum period. So I think that's where the problem begins. And so that's, I suppose, my drive behind my work is to start the education during pregnancy, start the conversation then, make the plan. It's why I offer postpartum planning sessions, so that to get couples actually thinking about what's the sort of support they're going to need post-birth. Because I think we focus so much on that birth that we just don't think about what follows. Yeah.
It's almost like the plan is like that. It fits into that saying for me of prevention is better than cure, because once you're in the damaged state and you're trying to scramble to fix something, it's 1,000 times harder than when you've set yourself up with this beautifully well-rounded experience, that you don't end up in a state of dis-ease in which you're searching for a cure, you know. And I've often thought exactly that. Yeah, and I've often thought that, Katie, is that we, even as a mother in a system, we spend so long, you're so important while you have this child growing inside of you. So important. And then the second that child leaves your body, all of the attention and focus shifts to the child outside of your body, and there's almost nothing for mothers.
Yeah. Totally. It's really woman as vessel to carry child, and then, like, you know, she's left kind of holding this baby. She's not actually sure how to parent and also parent herself through holding. And we have a culture that is always oriented towards, you know, I want to see the baby and the gifts and the you know, the squishiness of a newborn, but not also looking at that mother within that dynamic who needs just as much holding and nurturing as this new baby does.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, she's expected to go to a 6-week appointment and get her tick off to go and exercise again, and maybe like a, you know, half-hearted questionnaire on whether she's got P&D, but nothing to help her set her up to avoid that path.
Yeah. And I think what we forget is that through a birth of a baby, a mother is also born. And both of them need the same levels of support and care, and we're just completely forgetting the mum in that situation. So, yeah.
I remember from my first, we hired an independent midwife. Thank God. I want to thank me so many times back then just for trusting myself to make that decision. And I remember her watching me struggle once, and I think I was getting annoyed at my mother-in-law or something, and she was like, yeah, you know, you don't need to look after the baby. You don't need parents who come and look after the baby. You need parents who come and look after the mother, because when she's well looked after, of course the baby will be. And it's always sat with me where I'm like, if I ever visit anyone who's had a new baby, I'm like, just look after the mum. She's well equipped to look after her baby when she is well equipped. So our focus should be the care of a mother so that she can do the job of caretaking, as opposed to let me come and look after the baby.
Yeah, and that's what I'd love to see with new mothers actually asking for and accepting that help. And I think a lot of the time people don't want to be you don't want to be a burden, or your friends all have kids and they've all got a busy life too, and you know it's that, but it's actually, you're not, like, if you could just look after, if you could get yourself looked after, then that's the most beautiful gift you can give to your baby. So I think that's sort of what people sometimes aren't. They're not wanting to be a burden on the other person, thinking they can do it all themselves. But if only they would open themselves to receiving help from others, then how much more are they able to give to their child?
What have you witnessed in the women that you've worked with that prevents them from either wanting to ask or receiving any of that help? What do you see is in the way of that?
Oh, I think there's definitely this sort of perception in society that everyone else sort of does it alone, this whole, like, you know, you can do it all type thing. So I think when we look around and we don't see other people asking for help and thinking, well, she must, you know, she's managing okay and she's managing okay. So there's that perception of it being weak, you know, a sign of weakness to ask for help. I think that really plays into it. Definitely not wanting to burden others. And also, what was the other thing I was just about to say? A third thing. I think, yeah, just seeing, I think it's this seeing everyone else managing and not wanting to seem that you can't cope. I think it's.
So what do you say to women? Sorry, Bridgie, you go.
I was going to say, it's one of those things, like, you don't experience the hardship of it until you go through it and then realize that there's all these other silent women too. Like, it reminds me a little bit of miscarriage, right? Like, so no one talks about it, but it's everywhere. And it's only until you enter that you have this felt experience of every other woman who is struggling just like you, because our culture and the society doesn't put a lens on it. Doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, and I could share something really beautiful in terms of that. When I had a miscarriage earlier in the year, and I wrote about it, and I wrote about it, you know, in my social media, and I wrote a blog about it, and I got contacted by someone yesterday found at the 12 weeks there was no heartbeat, and she remembered reading what I'd written, and she contacted me, and we had a conversation, and afterwards reported feeling so empowered and supported, and I'm like, that doesn't happen unless we open up these conversations. You know, otherwise she'd be
so healing, isn't it?
You know, yeah. Healing for her and healing for me as well. So it was, really just
a gifting both ways.
Yeah.
But can I just take you back to that point of women who prevent themselves for those reasons from initiating perhaps the support that they need? How do you begin to open? What would you recommend, or what conversations would you start having with women to start talking about shifting that belief into one that's more cohesive for community support and holding?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things we talk about, and one is, you know, looking at postpartum from a more like global perspective and the socio-cultural historical perspective of postpartum, where in most cultures in the world, the new mother is cared for. She does not lift a finger in those first 6 weeks post-birth. So I think it's giving that context to it can sometimes be helpful to say, actually, the way we do it here in the West is not normal. Mm-hmm. So I think that,
Can I share a story with you about that? Where we live in Seaford, we've got some beautiful African families around, and my girls have a number of extended friends from this community. And I have spent a lot of time with some of those mums, and one of the women in this community had a new baby. And I was talking to my friend she works night shift. So she has 6 kids, and she still works night shift like 5 days a week and still gets up and does the kid thing all day. And you have never met a more vibrant, incredibly happy, loving, nourishing woman in your life. Like and I'm just standing there going, I don't get this. Like, and so this friend had just had a baby. And so she had gone the day with the kids, night shift and background, and they had this community of women in this woman's house having this big, like, mama cook up and looking after this woman. And then her niece just goes and lives with her for 4 weeks. And I was like, can you just, like, explain this to me? Because there's this, like, isolated white woman. Yeah. I have no idea what this is. Like, I don't even understand. And she was like, well, that's just what happens when we hear that, and it's all, even though you might not be related by blood, everyone's like an auntie or there's this connection of family, even though it may not be by virtue of blood. So when someone has a baby, they send their most able child, teenager, whoever, young adult, to go and live with this woman to simply take care of house, other kids, school runs, and everybody in this community does shifts of cooking. And so this beautiful mother rests and nourishes this baby. And I was like, wow, it's like blowing my mind. And I was saying to this mother, but on a personal level, like, do you not, like, feel a little resentful about this? Like, you have 6 kids. You're working night shift. You're doing all day, because she has twins as well. You're doing all day of this kid thing. And then you're still going to work and cook and clean for this other friend. And she looked at me like I was crazy. Like, she literally could not even comprehend what I was saying about resentment. Like, she was like, what? And I'm going, wouldn't you? Because I'm going, okay, I'm feeling really selfish, but there'd be this part of me that's like, yeah, but I need my energy. And she's like, no, like, that's what we do, and it's great, and we, like, love it. And I was like, wow.
Like, in most of the world, that's how it's done. And I think that shows how strong, like, social conditioning is, right? Because we have been brought up and we've watched our mothers doing it alone, and we've watched our grandmothers doing it alone. And so that's all we know. And we just look around and we just see everyone doing it all alone, because we live in this, industrialized society where, we live in our little nuclear families and everyone's just all out for themselves, this individual.
It's very individualistic. It's you are responsible for yourself and make your own way in the world, kind of thing.
Yeah. But I don't think you really get it until you see or hear a scenario like that. And I was like, it is so out of my concept of what's normal that I was like, I can't even, what? Like, to actually see what tribe and community supporting each other actually looks like, you realize how far we are from that.
Yeah, yeah. And
she didn't feel put out. She, like, loved it. She was full of life just by, all the women come together and they just cook all night together and they hang out, and all the kids are, I've been at her house and she'll have a 2-year-old that's fallen asleep on the top of the table. Like, it's just like this, like this beautiful community gathering, and all these mums looking after this one woman. And it's like just knowing that when it's your turn and you need it, it just comes back to you. Like, that's just how it works.
It sounds so life-giving too, because they then get to tap into, like, the juiciness of that, time of life, which is so full of, vibrancy, isn't it? I mean, even though the woman herself is often lacking, the very nature of birth is something, the oxytocin, and there's just something that's life-giving about it. And if they all know that it's everyone in supporting that mother, then it's almost like a feeding ground as well. Like, it's just this circular thing. Which is also, you know, why we know some midwives and some doulas love to work in birth, because of that life-giving. Yeah. But in our culture, it's also at odds with the reality that so many women feel so isolated.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that story, Katie, because I was like, I don't think we really understand even what that means.
Yeah.
So just understanding the depth of that support realizes how, I don't know what the word is, how scarce our white woman experience is.
Oh, that's just absolutely beautiful. It just warms my heart, and I think I wish that every pregnant woman could, you know, have that sort of experience or know that sort of support exists. Because I think, you know, I talk a lot about, you know, building a village, and so many people just look at me blankly and go, but how? It doesn't work like that for me, because they may seek support from other people. They may seek support from their own mother, for example. But if their mother hasn't had that level of support and has that sort of, well, I did it all by myself sort of attitude, then it can be really hard to actually get the help that you're really needing. So, I mean, that's why I think we just need a total paradigm shift in how we actually provide support to new mothers, and yeah. Just start by offering it for us. Well, if we have pregnant friends, just like you said, you know, when you've been through it yourself, you know that next time you go visit that new mum, you know what you're doing. You are folding that load of washing, making them a cup of tea, bringing them a meal, and taking their kids out for, you know, their older kids out for a play. Like, but that's not. I don't think that's really common.
What would you like to see women set themselves up to experience? What would you like them to see? If we know culturally, let's say cultures like my friend who might have 4 to 6 weeks where they're just completely looked after and essentially don't leave the bed, what would you like to see as the experience that we bring into our lives now as new mothers?
Well, I think, and it's something I've spoken to you before about, Jules, is that 7 sisters model, where you have, you know, during pregnancy you nominate seven sisters, whether it's your mother-in-law, friends, sisters, aunts, cousins, whoever it is, but you create your village by seeking support from these seven women. They each get nominated a day of the week, so that you've got your whole 7 days covered, and that for those first 6 weeks, you know that every day you've got someone who can bring you a meal, can take your, you know, like I said before, do all the things, to take all the household caring responsibilities off your shoulders, so that you can be fully focused on caring for your newborn baby. So I think that would be lovely. And people that I've spoken to who've had that in place have just, and it's often been, they've had that for subsequent children, like a third child, and just haven't, you know, cannot believe the difference in their postpartum period from
that it makes
earlier. Yeah.
What sort of role does a professional like yourself play in the postpartum experience?
Well, I think my role really starts in pregnancy. Unfortunately, I have to say the vast majority of clients that come to me actually come to me in crisis during postpartum. What I would love to see is more women. Actually, that's not true. I do have, you know, I'm thinking of the 3 women that I'm working with at the moment, providing the in-home care. All 3 of them actually did come to me during pregnancy, so that we're able to have that postpartum planning session where we look at that, you know, I focus on the first 6 weeks, but obviously, you know, the support needed goes beyond the first 6 weeks. But we primarily look at those first 6 weeks and put a plan in place. So what we do is we look at all the things that they might be needing support with, and then we look at all the different people they could ask for help from, and then we sort of, you know, allocate tasks, who they're going to ask for what sort of help.
Can I just ask you, do they ever have the experience where they ask and someone's like, I can't do that?
Oh, occasionally.
What do you think? How does that roll from there?
Yeah, so that's something that is challenging, because obviously they've put themselves out there in that way to ask for help, because it is you know, you'd have to be a bit brave to ask for help, just because it's just not the norm. But I think, I mean, the thing is to remember is that most people love to feel helpful. So very rarely is it going to be that someone says no. So I think that I'll always explain it from, like, if you're that if you're that person, if you're that friend and your friend comes to you and says, oh, would you mind bringing me a meal every Monday for 6 weeks after the baby's born, you're going to want to help that new mum, aren't you? So you're probably going to want to say yes. Rarely, look, I can't even think of actually an example where that's happened. I mean, it's more people that I've spoken to that I've heard of people saying no to. So I haven't actually, none of the women I've worked with that's happened to, but I've definitely heard of it happening. And I think you just have to go, okay, I tried there, that didn't work, and then look at all, look at the rest of your village and who else you've got to ask. And I think, who knows what's going on for that person as well, like not making that about you at all. It's probably something that they're going through. And I think it can often be someone who has had a perhaps negative postpartum experience themselves and sort of thinks, well, I did it all myself, so why should I? That unfortunately, that attitude's around a little bit as well.
That tends to be common in, I think that tends to be quite common in mother-in-laws or even mothers sometimes. This judgment that, look at how much you've got so much support that I never had, so why should you have more?
Yeah,
a little bit of woundedness.
Yeah, and again, that just comes back to their own woundedness. Their shit to work through, right? Like, try and brush that off and just focus on the people who are wanting to wrap you up in support.
This is the thing, isn't it? Is that often when we begin to step into creating deep and nourishing experiences for ourselves, we will automatically, by virtue of that, rub up the feathers of the people who cannot give that to themselves. And so the very mirror of witnessing you do something that they have not allowed themselves to do is so volatile on the internal world that they will reject you because that's the mirror of the rejection of self. Yeah. So really, I love that point, Katie, is just to really remove the attachment to it being about you and start to just see how that's a really wounded or, heartbreaking experience for that person, and that's they can't enter that feeling state for themselves. So therefore they can't give you that right now. So just to really compassionately feel into that rather than taking it as a wounding or rejection story. I love that.
Yeah, totally. So that's where we always start. I mean, if and where possible, always start with creating that postpartum plan during pregnancy, which does involve, and I've just been working with the most beautiful group of women through a pregnancy support group I was running, and actually throughout that 6 weeks, watching their confidence with asking for help just grew and grew. And it was amazing. By the end of that 6 weeks, they were asking people that they probably, wouldn't have asked before. And
Can I just ask you, you're going to run that again? Because I do think there's something extraordinary about that concept of, it's like group coaching, isn't it? It's you have this group of women that come together, and by virtue of watching other women do the thing that perhaps they're not brave enough to do, all of a sudden they find the courage to do that thing. So do you offer pockets of virtual places and spaces that women can gather to go through an experience like that? This was a pregnancy support group I was running in person, which I then moved online during COVID. That's just finished now, and I am about to start running another program that's actually for pregnant women and women in their postpartum. So I've sort of put the two together as Heaven. I think it's so important. So important, particularly if you don't have the community. And I would love to hear your experience on this too, because I want to talk about this in terms of COVID, is that so much of our support network is now needed to move online because in person becomes incredibly difficult. But I think there's still a lot of stigma around connections virtually as opposed to those that are in person. But if you don't have a community that is thinking and experiencing life in the way that you wish to and enhance the change that you wish to see, then creating that tribe online can be exceptionally nourishing to fulfill that experience of life that you're wanting to create. Right? I mean, is that your experience too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, also just speaking from my personal experience, I mean, I think about my closest friends now, actually pretty much all people I've met through Nourishing the Mother.
How great is that?
Way or another,
How great is that? This is the thing though, isn't it? When we decide to say yes to the thing that's really important to us and we actively seek that out, we, by virtue of that, find a community which thinks and believes and sees the world like we do, that we no longer have to be in the conformity of the physical location that we find ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And with these online groups I was running, all of a sudden I'm not limited to women of Gippsland.
Yeah.
You know, I'm reaching women
so
all over Melbourne, interstate. Like all of a sudden it just opens up to so many more possibilities of how many more people, you know, can be supported in that way. And I think, yes, this COVID experience, you know, as shit as it's been, like has actually, I mean, for me, it's just shown me just the power of or how powerful it can be connecting in an online space. And I'd have to say that actually the online groups that I've been running, women have been opening up more. And I'm wondering if it's something to do with being behind that computer screen where you're not actually meeting in person, but I really have been witnessing this like quite strongly.
I wonder if we consider the lens of COVID. Now, I'm just going to try to move. For those who's listening, I'm in a bathroom now because of COVID. We're having to obviously be separate when we're recording, and my house is quite loud right now, so I'm just going to shift myself.
But like you're hiding in the bathroom.
Well, I could hear the kids like super loud, and I'm thinking that's going to come through on the podcast. But now I'm in the bathroom echoing, so I'm shifted again. But you know, as you know, Katie, we tend to try to look at whatever's going on in the world from an evolutionary point of view. And so I wonder, in the case of COVID, how, as much as it's isolating pregnant women, is it also putting the lens on the needs of the mother and the pregnant woman, perhaps in a way that we haven't put the lens on her before because she's been invisible, but now we're thrusting her into the spotlight, and perhaps in some way, have we needed this in order to see how woefully unsupported so many women are, and that this might be the birthplace of them beginning to value this time? I wonder if that's been part of your experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, from the wisdom I've gained from you both, you know, will always do the reframe, you know, and look at the opportunities for growth and, you know, the positives to come out of this situation. And I think, yes, definitely.
May I refer to that? Because you have a blog that's called The Silver Linings of Postpartum in a Pandemic. And there's a few points there that I wonder if I could read and you could expand upon perhaps a little bit. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So firstly, I really loved that you started your experience on, before we start talking about the silver linings, I just really want to honour how hard this can be first. So women in COVID, new mums in COVID, maybe experiencing things, and I just thought that was really worth talking about, like cancellations of maternal and child health nurse visits, limited practical support with breastfeeding challenges, lost opportunities to meet other new mums through council-run mothers groups, missing out on social activities such as baby rhyme time, Kanga training, or mums and bubs yoga, limited friends and family dropping over to help, not having any respite during the day so you can shower or nap, and the loss of early bonding with grandparents and other extended family members. So I really wanted to honour that, because that is a legitimate, real experience for a lot of women. And I think it's, you know, really worth saying we also hear and see the challenges and the hurt that can come with that. But then I loved that you said, but I want to remind you, essentially, this is my paraphrasing, that cultures across the world have stayed home for the first 40 days or so after birth. And here you are, forced to stay home. So how is that actually a beautiful experience, as opposed to one that perhaps you feel the loss of privilege or freedom? And, you know, things can look different for older children, but for first-time mums, this period of isolation could potentially mean more time for rest. I thought, yes. For mums trying to establish breastfeeding, having no visitors could mean that you can focus all your attention on that without having to entertain or run around after other guests. So I just thought it's really beautiful, Bridget. And what I loved that you brought up then too was, how much does this globally start the conversation around how do we support mothers better? Like, how beautiful. So, I mean, Katie, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of that blog? And I would advise you to go and have a look at it. The link is in the show notes. Like, what do you feel about the concept of COVID potentially, as opposed to being doom and gloom, has with it some opportunities that you would love women to perhaps take up or consider how they can work with?
Yeah. And I think, that's why I opened the blog with just really wanting to acknowledge the challenges that that many women may face. And I suppose what I was trying to say in that blog is that even though women, new mums should, in an ideal world, be having all of this practical support, and that potentially COVID means, they're missing out on that support. In reality, how many actually do have that real practical support in place for their postpartum?
Not many, I imagine.
And I would argue that not many either. So, yes, you're missing, yes, some who had, look, if I had been having my baby, which I would have been having in September, so I would have been having my baby in COVID, and yes, I would have had a whole lot of support coming into the home, because the second I peed on that stick, my partner and I had a budget meeting, and we're like, right, this is the money we're putting aside from now for my postpartum period. So I would have had that experience. Others may, but I think the vast majority of new mums probably wouldn't be having that level of practical support that would be ideal. So, and I think in that blog I talked about, and I was reflecting on my own, experience of my first postpartum, where I was constantly entertaining guests. Like I was having, I think I had someone visit every day for the first month, which seems lovely, and it was. And I love the social contact and the company of all of that, but also there were times where I would finally get that baby to sleep, and it was like finally my opportunity to lie down and close my eyes as well. And ding dong goes the doorbell with my next visitor, and then I'm having to make the cup of tea and sit there and have this conversation when all I want to be doing is resting with my baby.
Sleeping. Yeah.
So I think, and it's interesting. I've run a few different groups during this time, but one of them, it was with a group of mums who had actually met as a group. So their babies were around about 3 months old at the time, because then all of a sudden all the council-run mothers groups, as soon as COVID hit, got cancelled, like nothing, like radio silence, So these mums are sort of like, no support. So I put on quite a few different free groups and things. And this particular group, I think, were unique in that they'd had the experience of pre-COVID, postpartum experience, and then the post-COVID. And there were definitely stories of, it's been so nice just to be able to rest when the baby's sleeping, and to also not have the visitors who bring with them the most loving and well-meaning of advice, but not very helpful when you're a new mum and you're trying to work out how the hell this thing goes, So to not, and just that feeling of being observed and, you're feeding him again, or, like, surely he can't be hungry again, or, like all those little comments.
Just gone.
You don't have
that. And there's also no FOMO. Like I do wonder if that actually can help some women in the identity transition into motherhood, because so often if you're a woman of the world and you're used to having your independence and being able to be and do and have whatever and see whoever, that the crashing reality of being home with a baby can be really challenging. But the thing about COVID, and particularly if you're in hard lockdown like we are, no one else around you is doing anything else but being at home too. And so in some way it's almost like a form of solidarity with knowing that there's not all this exciting stuff happening in the outside world, because everyone else is cocooning too, just like a new mother and her baby ideally should be. So that's another flip that I like on this scenario now, as challenging as it is to be isolated.
Yeah, that's true. And actually something I didn't write about in the blog, but I think is also a really valid point, is that a lot of women are grieving the loss of their mothers groups and not being able to connect in person. And while I really do acknowledge that, and mothers groups can be a huge source of support for some women, for others they're not. And I think particularly if you have a different parenting approach to the majority of your mothers group, they can actually be very isolating
soul crushing.
Yeah.
My first mother's group, my counselor, was horrendous because I was the only one trying to find natural parenting approaches. And I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? You know, because I was and I had the maternal and child health nurse say, you know, no attachment parented child has ever slept well. So I had this, she's like, you will not have a good sleeper if you continue to attachment parent.
Oh my God.
So it's so interesting when you consider the removal of that. What does it open you up for?
Yeah, totally.
And sometimes, I mean, and you know, in my case, I mean, I wouldn't have met Julie if I didn't have such a horrendous experience with that council run.
Yeah, because we specifically sought out the group of like-minded mothers. This is the whole thing, isn't it, Katie?
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Do you find the women that come to you have shared values or outlooks to parenting, or is it quite varied?
It's varied, but probably as I get more, what's the word, like authentic maybe with my message, I'm probably attracting more like-minded women. Yeah, but it's varied.
I wanted to,
I still have women telling me that they're worried about setting up the bad habits, and you know.
Yeah. But even as a long-term attachment parent, I still think you go through periods of doubt, don't you? Like that's just the mother's experience. She's like, there's no guarantees in this parent.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, and even fourth time round, you know, you forget so much as well. And I come back to this bit and I'm like, oh God, what am I doing here? What do I want to do here? You know, I still think that's part of the experience of motherhood is really, you know, clearing out the junk that's in your head and deciding what's authentic for you. I just think that's like a common experience.
Well, you know, and healthy questioning, I think, it gets you authentic and helps you kind of weed out your own stuck stuff as well as what's coming in, you know, from others. It's kind of, you almost need that tussle with your uncertainty to get your certainty.
Yeah, totally.
And in saying that as well, like I also do offer, you know, a very non-judgmental approach of, you know, whatever, you know, also just looking at whatever's going to work for that family and looking at what their values are. They may be different to mine, and that's okay, but actually working out what's going to work for them and their baby as well. So, try and put that.
I wonder if I could just talk about your second blog, which we also have the link for in show notes, which is support that is available to new parents during COVID, which some of these were new to me. So I wonder if I could just read your list of 10 things, and then I would love to hear from you what you would really love women to consider when looking at what do they want their new their postpartum to look like in this COVID era / at any point in time. So what you've got written down here is online mothers groups and circles, online emotional support, setting up meal train online, friends and family can grocery shop and drop off for you, laundry can be left out for someone else to collect, wash, dry, fold and drop off again, asking grandparents or others to entertain older kids by reading stories or playing show and tell over FaceTime or Zoom, maternal and child health nurse advice and support via telephone, breastfeeding advice and support also available via telephone, virtual postpartum doula support. So I'd like to know probably what that looks like. And you also said the Possums community room, which I wasn't familiar with either. So would you be able to give a little bit more context there?
Yeah, sure. So there's an approach to the care of parents and babies called neuroprotective developmental care, and established by a GP up in Brisbane by the name of Dr. Pamela Douglas. That's also called the Possums approach. So she's the author of the Discontented Little Baby book that some listeners might be familiar with. So that's like an evidence-based approach to the care of parents and babies, looking at the areas of breastfeeding, infant sleep, cry fuss problems and maternal mental health. And so I've trained in this approach. So I'm on the pathway to becoming an NDC accredited practitioner. And what they set up during COVID was this community room where they have accredited NDC practitioners there. They did have it every day. At the moment, it's dropped down to twice a week. Where it's this community room where any mum with a new baby can go and get support with any of those areas that I mentioned.
So community room being a virtual room.
A virtual community, sorry, yeah, a virtual room. So from anyone all around Australia. So they're based in Brisbane, but you can get this support anywhere.
That's amazing. And what does virtual postpartum doula support look like?
Okay, well, yeah, I can talk about my
please.
The way I provide this support is so I have a 6-week package. So the first 40 days, which includes a 90-minute postpartum planning session. We do that via Zoom. So that's where I go through everything that I would with, my usual in-home sort of support. So we make a plan for postpartum, and then once the baby comes, so instead of my in-home visits that I would usually do, I offer a Zoom call. So there's a Zoom call every week for those 6 weeks. I also include Voxer support, so that's unlimited audio and text messaging support through an app called Voxer. And I find that so valuable for new mums because stuff comes up all the time, right? Just little questions.
Just to check the thing.
Yeah, just to check the thing, exactly. Or just to have a bit of a vent about this family member said that, or I don't know, whatever. Like there's all these different reasons that you might just want to have that sounding board. And I find that people use that also as a form of sort of verbal journaling, their sort of experience of that first 6 weeks.
I also wonder, does that take a lot of strain and pressure off of the intimate relationship by virtue of you extending the support and the sounding board?
Yes, definitely. And this is something I talk to couples about as well, because your partner cannot be everything to you. It is very hard, particularly in this situation where we're, a lot of us are just at home all day, just with ourselves and our partner and our baby or children or whatever the situation is in your household. And I think partners have become a bit of like the everything. And I think this really does take pressure off. And also people, I get comments all the time how nice it is to have a space to be able to vent so that then they're not feeling like they're constantly burdening their friends or family or partner or whatever it is. And that's just a safe space where they can just, let it all out. So I think, that's been really, really valuable for new mums. And also I've got a gift pack, like a new mama sort of pamper pack that I send out with some nurturing things like massage oil and bath soak and a meal kits I've just got from the source. Bulk Foods, I'm really excited. They've put them in paper bags for me. Usually I'd put them in jars, but it was a bit heavy to send, so they've just done them up in paper bags for me so I can send. So it's this meal kit that all you need to do is put it in a saucepan with some stock and some coconut milk, and you've got this beautiful
that's amazing.
Whatever awesome. It is. Yeah. And then some mama meditations that beautiful friend Simone has created for me. So I send them out, and some lactation tea. So this is all products that I've sourced from like local producers.
Oh, it sounds so nourishing.
Yeah, so I think that's just a lovely little thing to get in the mail as well. So,
isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you see as the main differences in considering postpartum setup in pandemic versus out of pandemic? What do you see as the main points of difference that you would like people to consider?
Do you know what? Like, there's so much actually the same. I actually wrote a list that's the one thing I did in preparing for this podcast. I'm like, what are my tips? Like, what are my tips about? And I went through my tips, and actually I'm like, it's all stuff I'd just say anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, tell us what they are. I would love to hear those.
So I think COVID specific, I think I'd start with saying, let yourself grieve. Like, there will be aspects of this that, that there will be things you've missed out on that you were expecting. And for some, that might be the baby shower or your mother's group, or, having a family visit from interstate or overseas. That's been massive. Actually, I think it's affected all of my clients. It's affected all of my clients at the moment.
Can I interrupt you 1 second there with a story? As you know, I had my youngest at the hospital emergency a couple of days ago, and there was this beautiful mum in there with this young baby, and Gwen loves babies, so we ended up having a conversation and we were talking, and she said this statement like, by the end of this, my baby will have spent the majority of his first year of life in isolation. Like, how extraordinary is that? How extraordinary. This is literally history making, that we are literally living the age where we will look back and say, you spent the first year of your life in isolation.
Yeah.
I wonder what impact that does have developmentally. Yeah.
It's huge. And I think to that I would say, because, I think there's a lot of anxiety around what does that mean for a baby's development. And so, and this is probably taking from the possums approach I was talking about earlier, is how important sensory nourishment is for a new baby, and looking at other ways of providing that when we can't be getting out and about. So it is like using that 1 hour that you've got to exercise to get outside and exercise and to show them the world, and use your backyard or your balcony or whatever access you've got to the outside world to give them different enriching sort of sensory experiences, using FaceTime to connect. And I know it's not the same as in person, but still, they do get to know their grandparents and other family members via a computer screen. That's still really possible. So encouraging that, to staying connected with your friends and your family via, I think, video calls is really important. Doing things like still that you can still sing to your baby, read to your baby, dance with your baby, give your baby massages, bath with your baby. Like, there's all these ways that you can still provide that sensory nourishment to a baby in your home. And really a new baby actually isn't needing like they need you, and they need sensory experiences that you can provide in your home. They're actually not needing a whole lot of other, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Like play dates.
Such an important conversation.
They don't need the entertainment. Actually, in terms of baby's development, often being home is the best, because they're not having to face all of these transitions all of the time and the overstimulation of, really busy environments and all of that. Like, there's those benefits.
Yeah, like really, like your love, like that's the most important thing you can give to your baby, and presence, and connection. And I think that, to be honest with you, like COVID actually gives you that experience to have a different experience with your child, a different bond, where you're not carting this baby from one thing to the next, barely looking at it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not constantly in the car from one thing to the next, or like it's
kind of a deeper intimacy.
You can be so much more present with your baby when you're actually home with them. So can
I just ask you one other question on that?
Yeah.
How then do mothers balance, like what's your advice for getting the break, or have, if that sense of overload or overwhelm starts creeping up and we're in this isolation, and particularly we're in Melbourne, so Bridgie and I are in stage 4 lockdown. So you're stage 3, is that right? Yeah. So can you just talk a little bit, like I love your wisdom, and obviously being a social worker, you have such a profound depth of knowledge with, looking after mental and emotional well-being. Yeah. I don't have anything more. Can you just talk us through what that might look like? I'm trying to find the words, and I'm like, I don't have them because I have a felt sense in my body.
I think the break is the hardest thing to manage, especially when you're in stage 4. So we're stage 3 here. I'm still providing in-home support. So, and that's one of, I think, the biggest parts of my role in caring for new mums is to be able to give them that, that break when they need it. The situation we're facing at the moment is that a lot of partners are actually working from home when they would usually be out at work during the day. So I think this has been the case actually for close to 100% of my clients, actually, where they have had their partners at home, and so they actually are getting more breaks than they potentially would have if they were home by themselves with the baby for 12 hours while their partner was out at work. Because the partner's not having to commute, so they're home for potentially an extra 2 hours a day if they've had an hour commute to work and back.
Or potentially their lunch break, they can do this, or honey, can you take 10 minutes here while I go do that? Yeah.
Tea break, lunch break, and you're getting that more time every morning and afternoon, so or evening or whatever it is. So I've been encouraging mums to use that as much as they possibly can, and be getting out, really having some alone time. If they can be getting out just for a walk around the block by themselves once a day, and I say try and do it in the morning. I think that just makes the day flow so much better when you've had that little bit of a break and, you've had that chance to sort of fill your cup, and you might want to just put your headphones in and listen to some music or a podcast or whatever, and just be out in nature. And we all know that, exercise out in nature is so good for our emotional as well as our physical health. So I think, getting that in before your partner sits down, to work for the day is really important. And just getting literally taking whatever you can. I've got a client at the moment whose baby, her baby's first sleep of the day is in the carrier on her partner while he works. So he's
isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah. So he's been having the baby for about an hour and a half in the mornings. So that's her dedicated time with her toddler. On the days that her toddler's been at childcare, she's been able to, do something for herself at that time as well. So I think, the break is the hardest thing. I think where partners aren't already stepping up, then we need to be really asking them for that.
And I wonder too what when we're talking about, like, you not being able to have baby showers and not being able to, be lavished with gifts and all of those kinds of things, whether that's an opportunity for a woman who maybe is listening to this and thinking, wow, I need some support, is where women can actually say, what I would really love is for, if you're willing, family, would you be willing to contribute and put in for some kind of postpartum support package or some kind of meal train or subscription service where that and
it's about the care.
The care for me and the care for our family right now is far more important than us needing gifts. Because I think lots of women almost, they're used to getting, which is beautiful, being given new beautiful gifts for the baby. But sometimes what they're really yearning for is a meal cooked for them, or someone to come and clean, or someone to just listen with a completely open mind. And that's what a support package like what you offer can provide.
Yeah. Oh, there was just something else about to say, and then it's just left my head. But yeah, sorry.
It'll come back. Come back to your original. It'll come back, I reckon. Come back to your original points before I interrupted you. So you were saying in COVID, your main points of difference or not for postpartum care.
Yes. Okay. Oh, I've just remembered what it was.
Oh, good.
Okay.
But yeah, like what you said with the baby shower, and I think a lot of women are grieving this loss of a baby shower. Now, I've never had a baby shower. That's not high on my priority list. It just never was. So I think something like an online mother's blessing, like what you offer, Julie, is, which I've attended, the one that you facilitated, can be
deeply nourishing,
not more nourishing than a baby shower. So
and part of your setup.
Yeah. And have all those women who attend your online mother's blessing can then pop their name down on that meal train for you, or if they're not local, they can order, food to be delivered, and that sort of thing. Or there's these meal kits that I'm now including, like,
I love that idea. That's amazing.
So great.
There are ways around. There are ways around it. But sorry, back to your question on the points of difference. So yes, I think that was a big one. I think in terms of having like the break thing is something that's coming up a lot. I've got my little list here. Let me just have a little look. Oh, I know, a big one is just letting go of all the shoulds. Like literally,
it sounds so good, doesn't it? But then when you're living the shoulds, how hard is it?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. And I've lived the shoulds. I've lived the shoulds with a new baby where I had all these voices telling me that if I let my baby sleep on me, he would never learn to sleep alone, and that I had to get him sleeping in his bassinet by himself by padding and shushing, all of this. And I can tell you how bad that was for my mental health and how different an experience that was to me second time round when I let go of all that and let my baby sleep on me and in with me. And, so I think letting go a lot of the shoulds that you're hearing from sort of, I suppose, a lot of the mainstream parenting advice out there, which is often what you're getting from friends and family. Really like just focusing on the things that you can control. Because in this situation, there's so many things that you can't control. But there are actually, like, when you look at it, there are lots of things that you can. Just really like living in the present moment. And I know that can be easier said than done, but I think if you can just bring that, that mindfulness to your day, where you are actually, rather than constantly projecting into the future which is really anxiety inducing, where you think about all the things that could go wrong, or even these thoughts of, oh my gosh, my baby's development is going to be so affected throughout, even those sorts of thoughts, like, that's actually not something you've got control over right now. This is like, what you do have control over is how you can respond to your baby and communicate with your baby and show your baby love. And, they're the things you've got control. You can control how you change their nappy and talk with them, and, bringing mindfulness to that, rather than, quick, I've got to get the nappy changed because there's the sink of dishes that I've got to get done and the washing to hang out. Just bringing your attention to that present moment, and just, making eye contact with your baby and feeling the sensation of their skin as you, putting the nappy on, and, talking to them, and just really, I think this is, like I said, a lot of this advice is stuff that I would say to a new mum in COVID or not COVID, but I think it's even more the case where we really are, I suppose, so isolated from outside contact that it becomes even more important to bring in the joy into our days, and thinking about, and I think, the biggest question I get people to ask is what do I need right now? If you're feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, anxious, just pausing and just regulating yourself, and just taking some really deep breaths, and just tuning into your body and think, what is it that I need right now? And wherever possible, giving yourself that. And that could be just, just a few moments of really deep breathing, and maybe getting some nice hand cream and massaging that through your hands, or on, through your neck, or calling a friend, popping the baby in the carrier and going out for a walk to get some fresh air. It could be anything. Putting on some music, putting on your favourite music that lights you up and gets you dancing, and really like getting into your feminine and just dancing with that baby, and just really loving on every, those moments that you get. I think it's looking at ways to insert those pockets of deliciousness throughout your day. Which, I know that may come across as like, a bit hard. Like, I know a lot of new mums are really struggling right now, particularly when you've got when there's older children as well to juggle.
I do think that's more challenging in COVID.
Yeah, I think that is a different situation. I think in COVID, certainly for the last lockdown period that we went through, probably the biggest gift I gave myself during that period, when I had my kids home full time and was also in the process of moving my entire business online and running all these programs and groups, was dropping the guilt around TV.
Yeah.
This is short.
There's a time and a place for it.
Yeah. Like, just something, like giving ourselves a break, speaking to ourselves kindly and with compassion, not beating ourselves up for, not being the perfect mum, and activity. I mean, things like with the older kids, each night you could be packing them a lunchbox and setting up an activity for them, so that that's something less you've got to think about the next day. You're not constantly being demanded.
Responding to demands for water and snacks.
Yeah.
That's really good advice, actually.
That's good. Go ahead.
What else? I think when all else fails, use water. So I put a photo up on Instagram the other day of my kids, yes, in the middle of winter in Gippsland, naked in our paddling pool. But that can, I think water is such an underthought of thing. Getting in the bath with your baby, if they're really dialed up and crying, and I think having a bath and giving them a breastfeed in the bath, and again, kids in the bath, water play, giving your kids a bucket of water so they can paint the fence, all those sorts of things. Getting them involved. I mean, I get my kids involved in chores like all the time where they, help with putting the washing away or hanging the washing. And yes, it takes longer, but, we're not going anywhere. So just getting them really involved.
So before we wrap up, Katie, and we ask you our 3 quickfire questions, is there anything that you would really like either new mums or pregnant mums to know or please consider in creating the space for yourself that can be deeply nourishing?
Yeah, so I think probably my 2 key things are get as much rest as you possibly can. We always function better when we have well-rested bodies. And again, that can be different when you've got toddlers running around as well. But in whatever capacity you can, like if you do have a partner working from home, take the 10 or the 15 minutes, whatever you can, to go and lie down during the day to just, recharge. So I think rest is super important, and just you've got no one coming over at the moment, so don't worry about that. Like if it's a choice between housework and rest, always take rest. So I think that's, first one. And the second one is support. Like you must have support around you. So that's something I really encourage mums to do in pregnancy, is to have their list of numbers on the fridge. And that can be, the friends that you can call when you are on the kitchen floor falling apart. Who can you call at your most vulnerable? So, and then also, a list of numbers of professionals, be that your maternal and child health nurse, Australian Breastfeeding Association, GP, whoever it is you've got there as well, Panda, for mental health support. And also think ahead. I mean, not to say everyone needs a postpartum doula, but
wouldn't it change our culture if we all had that as a setup experience though?
Well, that's what I think.
Yeah. Like as important as the private obstetrician.
Yeah.
Who is there for maybe 10 minutes of your birth?
That's a lot to shift.
$7,000. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that's that it's what breaks my heart is seeing how much time and energy goes into planning and money, time, energy, and money that goes in planning for all your all the material objects that you think you need in postpartum. Like very rarely is money put aside for
mental, emotional, and physical support.
It still blows my mind the amount of time I spent on my son's nursery and researching all the things I had to buy versus the birth and the postpartum and every edge I might hit as a woman in that transformation. That was all like a rude shock, a lot of that. And yet I don't think that many women meet that unless they're surrounded by community or people who put a lens on that. So I think it's beautiful that you're doing that.
Yeah. Like my dream would be that every woman could have a postpartum doula. Like really, that's my dream. And unfortunately, there isn't a Medicare rebate for postpartum doula services currently. So
no, I would love to see that too, though, I have to say. All right. Can I ask you the 3 questions that we ask all of our beautiful guests?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So question number 1 is, can you reflect upon a time in your life where you've experienced a pain or a wound and have consequently or subsequently turned that wound into wisdom?
What first came to mind was actually the death of my mother. So my mum died when I was 11, and then my mother-in-law died before we had children, very early on in our relationship. And I was thinking that was it, but I actually think I'm going to change. And it's actually going to be, I think, the miscarriage I had this year. I was just giving you the example before of this incredible conversation I was able to have with this one woman as a result of me sharing my experience online and how that has changed her experience. And I just feel like there's like I don't yet know the impact of that, of that experience, but I just feel like it has given me so much more empathy having gone through that pain myself, for the women that I work with. So I think that's...
And does it change the support or guidance that you offer or would consider for women who are having a miscarriage? Like, is that changed by virtue of having a miscarriage experience yourself that you healed?
Yes. It has, because I can now look back. I mean, I was absolutely surrounded by this village of support, a literal circle of women around me when I was having that experience, and I was constantly processing and reaching out to my friends who'd had similar experiences and hearing their stories and talking about it and voxering my mentors about it. And this constant processing of it meant that within a couple of days of the experience happening, I felt really good. As in, I felt like I'd worked through all of that pain, and I was able to, I don't think move on isn't the right term to use, but yeah, I was able to just cope so much better having wrapped myself up in all of that support. And I had time, and as you know, Jules, like, I was away at that time. I was away at a women's festival when it all happened, so it was, a deeply spiritual experience. So not everyone's going to have that sort of, and, so I was away from my family, but just I think having that time out for me where I could go for the long beach walks by myself and sit on the beach journaling out all my feelings around that, I think was deeply healing and something that I can now pass on to other women.
So beautiful. What are the books that have been most influential in your life that you would have the deepest desire for every woman in this world to read? And if you could, that they would be the books that you gift every woman, maybe as they leave high school or maybe as they come to their first antenatal appointment, what would be that little box of books or bag of books or book only that you wish every woman would read in her lifetime?
Oh, this is such a hard question. Something that was really influential on me was a book. Actually, a friend of mine wrote this book, and it's called The Latte Years by Philippa Moore. And this book basically describes, it's her autobiography of how you are in charge of your own life and how she turned this very negative situation that she was in at the time. She one day just woke up and realized that she had power to change that experience and completely changed her life. And I think reading that it just gives me goosebumps now to think about, like, it's so true. Like, we're all in the driver's seat here, right? Like, we can all take the steering wheel and actually change the direction. We've got the power within us. And I think actually, as well as that book, doing your Loathing to Loving program was really pivotal for me to also, that was like another piece for me. Like, I was on maternity leave when I did that program, planning to go back to my hospital social work job that I'd been doing for, more than 10 years. And it's like I'd never even thought that there was another option. That was just
beautiful.
That was just the path that I was on. So to actually, and I think, this book also plays into it, but also that course to actually go, oh, no, there are actually other options, and I am actually in control of my destiny here. And, I think, is so powerful. So I'd love every woman to read that book. Yeah.
Are there any really pivotal books to read on postpartum care, do you think?
Yeah, I think like my two favorite, I've got three favorites actually. I've got three favorites. So the first would be The Fourth Trimester by Kimberly Ann Johnson. The second, The First 40 Days by Heng Wu, and Julia Jones's book, Newborn Mothers. All really beautiful books.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've all got in my book library that are all actually currently out on loan. Yeah. And it's a book, actually, Julia Jones's Newborn Mothers is actually a book that I gift every new mum that I work with.
Oh,
it's a small little book and just beautiful little small chapters and really easy to read, and just, everyone who reads it just gets all the oxytocin feels.
That's so good, isn't it?
Yeah.
So last question, if you could have a billboard anywhere in the world on any major super highway that everyone would see, what would your billboard say?
What do you need right now?
That's amazing.
Best question in the whole world. So, Katie, could you please do a wrap-up of where any of our listeners can find you and your work and get in contact with you?
Yeah, sure. So you can sign up on my mailing list at www.katieparker.com.au. You can find me on Facebook at Katie Parker pregnancy, postnatal and parenting support. I'm just about to change my Instagram handle to Katie Parker Postpartum. I think that's it. Yeah, they're the places.
Do you have any programs running during this COVID period that people can jump in for additional support?
Yes, I'm about to actually launch my new program called The Group Hug. And it's for any woman who's either pregnant or in her postpartum period who would like to join together with a community of like-minded mothers for weekly group support calls, meditations. I'll be jumping in doing like mini workshops, mini live workshops in the Facebook group during the week, and dropping a whole lot of like resources and tips and that sort of thing in the group. And then we finish off with a women's circle at the end of the month.
Oh, sounds like beautiful. Absolute heaven. Thank you so much for sharing your time, heart and energy with us here today, Katie. It's been a really beautiful, honouring and I think deeply needed conversation. So I'm really grateful. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's just a dream come true to be on your podcast. So thank you.
Oh, thanks.
And if you want to support Nourishing the Mother and all the late nights, the early mornings, the blood, sweat and tears we pour into our art, then please go to patreon.com/NTM podcast and become our patron. As a patron, you're helping all of the cost of operating this podcast, the hosting, the editing, the transcription, helping all of that be completely covered, and joining a community who are all about honouring our journeys and continuing to open. The more support we have, the longer we can last. So become a patron. We'd love to have you. Go to patreon.com/NTM podcast. We literally couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.